Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Stenton. I'm Laura Keim, Stenton's curator, and this afternoon we're going to take a brief Facebook Live tour of Stenton's Parlor. And just to give a little bit of background for any of you who've not been following along, Stenton was completed in 1730 for Pennsylvania's colonial secretary, James Logan. He would move in here when he was just about 50 years old in 1730, and he died in 1751. So he lived here with his 4 children between the ages of 2 and 15, his wife, Sarah Reed Logan, and their household of both indentured and enslaved workers who primarily lived in Stenton's garret and over the outbuildings. So as we look around the parlor, you get a sense for the room. It's in fact the second largest space on the ground floor, but we know from its architectural features, as well as the fact that it was the most expensively furnished room in the house when Logan died and his estate was inventoried in 1752, that it is the best room in the house. And you may have noticed that all 4 walls are paneled with, again, our previous weeks have also mentioned this Bolection molded frame paneling, these raised panels that actually stand proud of the wall plane that are in all of the best rooms at Stenton and here on all 4 walls. Other things to notice actually are that the panels against the fireplace wall are narrow, one because of the window, and here the same size. So there's this kind of intentionality, actually almost of making a kind of vanishing point in the room toward the fireplaces. And the word parlor actually comes from the French word parler, to speak. And this is about the fact that this room literally, in terms of what's in it, speaks to the visiting public, people that would come to have tea or dine in here with the Logans, about their kind of genteel status, the wealth that they'd attained in their lives through mercantile trade in the Atlantic world. Trade with the Indians was another thing that James Logan is well known for. But it's also a room about conversation. And so people coming together around tables, whether they're the dining tables that the workers are bringing in from the entry and extra chairs so that almost 20 people can comfortably dine in here, or setting the room for tea. And so you can think of this fireplace wall almost as kind of a literal stage set. And so the enslaved and indentured workers can go in and out, kind of back and forth, bringing food, and particularly this closet, we don't know for certain, but we do know from Stenton's Historic Structures Report, written in 1982, that the plaster that forms this small closet is not original to the house. This was a wood-shelved closet, and we believe because of the opening here in the passage that this was very likely a kind of dumbwaiter closet. So we also know from Logan's 1720s ledgers that he did have some servants who wore livery. That would be a very expensive coat with trim, 2 male servants. They may have been riding on the coach, but they also may have been the people in the parlor serving food, so that less well-dressed servants or enslaved people would be working behind the scenes, loading the closet, and these well-dressed servants are actually serving food here in the parlor. But let's look at the other closet. This is known as the buffet, and we do know from early American inventories that there are a lot of phonetic spellings for this word. The Logan inventory really does follow the French form B-U-F-F-E-T, but Americans probably said things like buffet and beaufet when they described these features that are, again, like a grand staircase framed by an arch, a kind of indicative feature of a gentleman's house parlor, to sometimes have symmetrical buffets, or as here at Stenton, just a singular one with a sunburst or a shell shape in the top, a somewhat graduated set of shelves for displaying porcelain, again, very expensive commodity, and silver. There were 148 pounds of silver in this cupboard in the time of Logan's inventory, and that included a massive tankard commissioned in 1714 for the marriage of James and Sarah Reed Logan, which we think sat here. It's in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. An English tea service, a coffee pot made here in Philadelphia. So a number of pieces. Actually, you can see when the Philadelphia Museum of Art galleries reopen to you in the future. But a lot of the porcelain and other ceramics that we have here at Stenton, and I'm going to just pick something up for you to see. We have mended archaeological wares excavated on site in 1982 behind the original kitchen and wash house that was not off of this parlor side of the house, but the other side behind the back dining room. And porcelain was hard to get in Philadelphia in the early 18th century, and I'm going to try holding it up to the light. We'll see if this comes through at all in the video, but you may be able to get the sense for the fact that porcelain is kind of luminescent, translucent. Light does come through it. It's very glassy. When it breaks, it has a very fine edge. And so only the Chinese knew how to make this in the first part of the 18th century. And so it's a very desirable trade, and again, a kind of marker of status and whiteness in the 18th century home. Other teawares manufactured in England tried to also get at these white-bodied ceramics. This is poured into a mold. It's a salt-glazed stoneware teapot. Again, it's white and it's thinly molded, and you can kind of see on the inside that sense of the liquid that went in there, the slip clay that was poured in the mold. But it does not have that translucent quality. There's no light coming through it, but it's very shiny from the salt that was thrown into the kiln when it was fired. But we know so much about the ceramics that the Logans had from this feature that's all pre-1760, and even includes things like well-potted but redware clay tea bowls that might have been an imitation of Chinese iron oxide glazed or brown cups, as they were called on the inventory. They're sometimes known as Batavian wares. And exactly who used these, we're not necessarily entirely sure, but we think that servants here at Stenton may have had some of their own tea wares as well. Other things about this room that tell us that it's the best room in the house are the marble surround. This is our local King of Prussia or Schuylkill River Valley marble. This is the only slab around a fireplace in the house. And the largest fireback in the house. These arched top firebacks were cast at Durham Furnace in Bucks County, a furnace in which Logan was part investor. And this one has his name, the I for J, at this time period, IL, and the date 1728, which is getting to the point when Stenton is near finished, but probably represents a kind of special blast at the furnace. And this design has these sort of volutes and kind of cascading bellflowers down the sides. The tiles in this room were changed out by the colonial dames in the 1950s, and I'll show you a picture of what the original tiles looked like shortly. But we also have a post about some of these tiles in our Curator's Cabinet of Curiosities on our website and blog, as do we about the parlor, or about the parlor buffet, rather. So just wanted to take a little time with some of the furniture in here too. The tea table has been at Stenton since 1915. It's part of a kind of core bequest of family objects from a gentleman named Samuel Benton. So there's, I don't know if you can come down, it has a very large round baluster base. And then the chairs in the room. There were actually 10 leather bottom chairs in the room, and I should add that chairs were not described by style, they were described by upholstery, which was the part that dictated really in many respects how expensive they might be. And on the ground floor of Stenton, all the upholstery was leather, where food was primarily taken, and we have the damask upholstery upstairs. But this, what we sort of loosely call Stenton chairs, and in reality, these chairs may have come from the Norris estate or the Logan estate. The Norrises and Logans would intermarry twice in the 18th century. If you saw the Blue Lodging Room tour 2 weeks ago, you met Deborah Norris Logan, and we're going to talk in a few minutes about the Chippendale chairs in here, which belonged to John Dickinson, who married James Logan's granddaughter, Polly Norris. So it's hard to say for certain that these were absolutely chairs that were at Stenton in the first generation of their existence, but they were definitely in this house at some point in the past, or at least parts of these sets would have been. And this kind of form of chair, where I'm going to turn it this way just a little bit for you, where you have this, they're often known as the Queen Anne style chair, or in England, early Georgian chairs, and they just curve all over. In their time period, they were known as having an India back, which looked toward Chinese shapes for the form. And so you just notice that there is this kind of scrolling curvaceous quality throughout in this style, which was popular in the second quarter of the 18th century, also characterized by these baluster shape or vase shaped splats, typically often solid. So some of the things that are really characteristic of these, what we sort of loosely call our Stenton chairs, are these kind of three-toed feet, sort of embryonic curving multi-toed feet, the C-scrolls under the knees, and a veneered front of walnut, which may be English walnut, that's covering up these joints where you can see that a dovetail and two pegs is holding the leg. The dovetail is actually the top of the leg coming in to the frame. And then the final bit that's a little bit unusual for American chairs is this single round stretcher in the back. But these do have a kind of characteristically Philadelphian sort of round, stumpy kind of leg. They do not have through tenons in the back, which does become often an identifying feature for Philadelphia-made chairs in the 18th century. And this particular chair, and one with it, this particular one, though, is on loan to Stenton from the Dietrich America Foundation. So let's actually look at the desk and bookcase next, which approximately maybe dates to roughly the same time as those chairs we just looked at in manufacture. It's a Philadelphia piece, but we can't really nail it down to absolutely being a James Logan piece, but is one of the heaviest and best made surviving examples of this form, with the ogee top and possibly changed out actually glass doors. And interestingly, Logan's inventory talks about a scrutor worth £7. His wife's, just a few years later, mentions a scrutor with looking glass doors. Whether it's being more specific about the same piece or not is interesting. But this was a place where a merchant like James Logan could store the large ledger books for keeping all of the accounts. And there are many, many drawers, all these little serpentine front storage pieces, a prospect door, again, with more storage and secret compartments behind, and these pop-out compartments where one could file papers. This too pops out. This is lignum vitae, an exotic hardwood for these kind of classical components. And there's an aspect to the desk that is a kind of book-like quality. These inlaid doors almost look like the covers of books. The fluted columns almost look like the spines of books, and it certainly has a very kind of classical design, like things of its period. But I also wanted to spend a little time with the Chippendale chairs. And these really are, I think it's fair to say, some of the treasures of Stenton's collection, but not actually made for Stenton. These were commissioned by John Dickinson, the signer of the Declaration, probably about 1770, and the back does follow one of the plates in Chippendale's Director, but then with the kind of more characteristic early American Chippendale cabriole legs, the curved legs that you also saw on the earlier Queen Anne chairs, claw and ball feet, again a fairly provincial kind of feature, and these kind of scrolling carved acanthus leaves, which seem to match or quite close to the carving on a pair of John Dickinson sofas in the Port Royal Parlor at Winterthur, which then to kind of go along with these solid seat frames here actually has a veneer. Those sofas have a veneered rail in front, and so you can imagine how these might have looked against the walls of John Dickinson's townhouse parlor in Philadelphia. And I did pull the seat out of one of the chairs. I know in previous weeks we've had some furniture aficionados following our posts, our video posts, and these have been reinforced with iron at a later date. Some of the wood blocks are missing, but the carver did a little doodling. I don't know how well you can get this. At the back of this chair, or on the board perhaps before it was made into the chair at all. And you can just maybe pan a little bit some of the carving here. And this was originally a large set of chairs, 12 side chairs and 2 armchairs. We do have 1 armchair. Its mate is at Winterthur, and it actually has been repaired over time so that some of its ears have lost some of their carving. And on the back, you can also see some interesting ironwork that was created to reinforce that pierced splat back of the chair. And one of my most favorite things at Stenton, and you can also find this on our posts, the Curator's Cabinet of Curiosities, is the Anne Emlyn grotto box. So I know if you kind of come in close, you may be able to light that up a little bit. But you can see this shellwork grotto made by Anne. Her initials AE and the date 1757 are in the top, with a wooden servant doll essentially in the door, and lady servants on the staircase and in the garden in their silk dresses. This also has an amazing piece of glass where you can see the pontil mark from where it was blown all the way out to the arc here. So you're seeing a very large piece of hand-blown plate glass. The looking glass in the room is on loan to us from the Philadelphia History Museum, so we've been very grateful to have that. It came from Maria Dickinson Logan at Loudon nearby. Other pieces that came from Loudon, I didn't mention when we were at the desk, include James Logan's Scyphus, which may well be the first piece of classical pottery to be owned and collected in North America, sent to Logan perhaps by Peter Collinson. Again, another published fact, but we haven't been able to fully retrace that trail. And then Logan's marble collection. So many European collectors would have stone top tables and things in there that they would bring back from Italy and install in a country house. Logan did not take the grand tour, but had the opportunity to receive these collected marble stones. So one final thing I didn't mention about the architecture that I did want to, and I'm not sure how well it will come across, but the floor in here is also the best floor in the house. It's a doweled floor, so that means there are little pegs between the boards to prevent them from cupping, and it means that the floor does not have to have surface nails. So all these boards are exactly the same width, they run the full length of the room, and they've survived in remarkably good condition because they have very few knots and no nails. So if there aren't any sort of final questions popping in, I'm really delighted that you joined us today to see a room that fundamentally didn't have a lot of color in it. It was a stone color, it had leather seating, but when the ceramics were out, the blue and white, the red, the gilding would have its play in the room, and so the actual object of entertaining was where so much of, in the food and the service of food is where the vitality of the parlor lay.